Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk about counterarguments. I'm going to start off by talking about what it is and why they're good to have in your argumentative essays. I'm going to talk about the ways that you can respond to a counterargument, and then I'm going to show you how to structure a counterargument paragraph in contrast to how we structure our supporting body paragraphs. And both of the documents that I'm using in this video are on our Canvas page for you to have as resources. Okay, so to start off, what is a counterargument? So a counterargument is an opposing view in an argument. So basically, any point of view that's different from your own is going to count like a counterargument. So anything that you don't totally agree with, or anything that someone who has a different opinion might say in response to your arguments. So why do we have counterarguments in our argumentative essays? Well, one reason is by anticipating what someone who thinks differently than us is thinking, or their kind of logic. We can often come up with points that might disarm them or kind of really challenge them. We can also make our own position stronger when we state and then refute or disprove opposing premises by demonstrating their weakness or falseness. So it can add to our argument by taking one of their points and showing how they're weak or false. We also appear more reasonable. We're showing our audience that we've actually considered more than just our own perspective. So it makes us seem more reasonable. When we acknowledge the possibility of merit in our opponent's reasoning, we actually have taken a step in establishing ourselves as knowledgeable and a generous thinker. We don't have to always just acknowledge that opponent or other person's perspective and disprove it or explain why it's weak. It's still okay to actually give credit to those points that we say, actually, there's validity to that point, or I agree with that point to a degree. So that's an okay thing to do as well. We may even also discover weaknesses or contradictions in our own thinking as we look through and think through the different reasons that we want to talk about in our own argument. So it can help us even assess our own argument and maybe even, revise it a little bit. So it really does add a lot to an argumentative essay. The big thing is it shows that we've considered other perspectives, that our essay's not just, I think this, and here's 3 reasons why I'm right. Instead, it's, I think this, and then some people might say this, and then here's how I'd respond to it. So getting into that, one way, and probably the most common way we respond, is called a refutation. So this is where you would then explain why that other side's argument is somehow false or weak or missing something. So in your paragraph, the way you would do it is you would start by presenting that counter argument, and then you'd follow it up with explaining why that position is false, misleading, or irrelevant. So somehow you would discredit that reason. So an example from this essay that a student wrote supporting active euthanasia, which is if somebody is terminally ill, active euthanasia is when they're able to end their life early so they don't have to suffer with whatever the illness they have. So if we look at how they structured this, we start off with, some say death and suffering are in keeping with God's universal plan for humanity. The dying process, no matter how long or how agonizing, has both spiritual and moral purpose, functioning to prepare people for this painless eternity of heaven. So this first part is the other argument. And the key here is some. By the author saying some, they're separating it from their own point of view. Some say, or you might even have a specific author. If a specific author has, you're going to use a quote from somebody who said a certain thing. You could say many believe, others think. All of those kinds of things are important to start those sentences off with because it's establishing that it's not your point of view. If you don't have something like that, it's going to read like a topic sentence, and your reader's going to think that it's your point of view and that maybe even that you're contradicting yourself. Now, the shift here gets into the response. To believe this argument, however, one must believe that there is life after death, and many do not. So why can't people live and die in accordance with their own value system? Let both the religious and secular have some control over their own destiny, Give those who choose to die that alternative while honoring the belief of those who do not. The key word that signals to us that this is now a refutation and that the author is giving his or her response is the word however, because however is one of those contrast kind of words. So some say this idea, and then I'm going to say however to signal to my reader that now I'm going to talk about why that position is weak or false. And they mention here at the bottom some other contrast words you can use to make that transition from here's what they say, and then here's why I'm going to tell you it's weak or false. The other way we can respond, and a lot of times people get really scared to do this because they think they're hurting their own argument, is a concession paragraph. So this is a paragraph in which the author would basically grant the opposing view some credit and maybe some level of agreement. It doesn't have to be you completely agree. You could say, I agree with this part of it, but I disagree with this part. Or you could just say, I agree with that perspective or that point of view. So the way you do it is, again, you start off with acknowledging and stating that counter argument, that opposing viewpoint, and then you recognize the merit of it and you concede that point. So again, from that same kind of topic and paper, and you can see it's a shorter paragraph because to acknowledge you agree, you're not going to need a whole lot of space necessarily, depending how complicated that counter argument is. So we have, although I also believe that life is sacred and murder is wrong, I don't think that ending the life of a brain-dead patient is equivalent to murder, since in the true sense of the word life, the patient is not living. So we see that kind of contrast word again of although, and then we have some other options given down here. So we see that they're saying, although I also believe that life is sacred and murder is wrong, so that's where we're getting the concession. This author is agreeing with the opposing viewpoint on this one point. And then the author acknowledges, though, that saying life is sacred and murder is wrong, it's kind of complicated in that kind of scenario of someone who's terminally ill. So that would be a possible kind of concession paragraph. So you could do either. Now, my recommendation in terms of placement of counter-argument paragraphs, because that's usually the question that follows after I go over this, you want to place it where you feel like it best fits with your different reasons or points that you're talking about. You also want to think about persuasiveness. Typically, you want to think about ending on your most persuasive body paragraph, because that's usually what your reader will remember the most because it's the last thing they read. If you're doing a concession paragraph, it should be early in your essay. You don't want to end your essay giving credit to that opposing viewpoint or that opposing perspective. For refutation, it really depends where you feel like it fits best. You want to think about the logic of it. You want to think about your audience and where it's going to be the most impactful. Typically, though, people tend to do counter-argument paragraphs first. But again, I would say, you want to think more about the logic of it and what's going to be the most impactful and persuasive for your reader. Okay, so let me show you how to structure this in contrast to the supporting body paragraph. So we've covered structuring a supporting body paragraph. So we know from earlier in the semester, we want to have those T paragraphs. Those are the structure of a supporting body paragraph. So we start off with a topic sentence where we state the specific point we're going to prove and explain that supports our thesis. We give our evidence, and then we have our analysis where we address these questions to really explain how that evidence is proving our point and the relevance to our overall argument. Now for a counter-argument paragraph, and it's important that you structure it correctly because you don't want it to read like another body paragraph, or like a supporting body paragraph, excuse me. So a counter-argument, you want to start off with that other viewpoint. And you're going to start the paragraph by stating the counter-argument other viewpoint, making sure you attribute that other viewpoint to someone else. So this is where you might use a specific author. You might do the more general many believe, some point out, or some variation of that. And then you're going to follow it with your response to the counter-argument. So you're just going to explain whatever your response to that counter argument is. You'll explain either why you agree with it, if you're going to concede it, or you're going to explain maybe that you agree with a part of it and what part you agree with, and then explain what part you don't agree with. You may, if you're going to refute it, you explain what's missing in that argument, what's weak about it or false. You may, depending on your response, include evidence if it's really going to help prove your response and really disprove that opposing viewpoint. But sometimes if it's more about the ideas, you may not need to have evidence to disprove that point. But again, so you can see the difference in how we structure that supporting body paragraph with topic, sentence, evidence, analysis, in comparison to a counter argument, which is stating that counter argument or other viewpoint and then following it with your response to that argument.